Hey, Mary Wisniewski here, Cornerstone Advisors, Editor-at-Large. Today on the show, I'm speaking with Lindsay Bryan-Podvin, and she's the founder of Mind Money Balance. And she has many titles, but among them are financial therapist, author, and speaker. And through December of this year, she's also Cash App's financial therapist. I was so excited about this convo because I'm really curious about financial therapy. I am sensing that one way fintech and also credit unions may start to try to stand out in the pack is by working with financial therapists. In this chat, we explore what the profession is and what it could mean for the industry. We also explore how emotions and money are deeply linked and the importance of making compassion part of the product. One note, I call Cash App Square in the call. My bad. We're only talking about Cash App and her work there. Here's our combo. Lindsay, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on Money Isn't Everything.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be chatting with you, Mary.
You have no idea how happy I am to be chatting with you, although maybe you do, because I just told you before this that I'm super excited because you're a financial therapist, and I keep hearing about entrepreneurs, in the fintech space wanting to start applying this kind of thinking, if not bring in this kind of talent to their companies. So I'm excited to mine your brain about the profession. And I thought that's where we'd start. As a financial therapist, you are exploring the emotional side of money. And I think it's so important because people have physical reactions to money. And to me, I think about how I enter a doctor's office and I start sweating. And I feel like these are the kind of threads that come out for a lot of money decisions. So I thought we could start by you setting the stage of the significance of the studying and practice of the emotional side of money.
Yeah, of course. So as you already explained, money is emotional. We all have different relationships with money. And when it comes to what a financial therapist is and what they are and what they do, just like there are therapists who can specialize in things like childhood development or couples issues, a financial therapist is a mental health therapist who has specialized training in the psychological, emotional, and systemic side of money. And these are the people who are there to help individuals with those emotional stressors that come up with money. So financial therapists are there to provide a space to discuss money without judgment and using techniques from the therapy room, but also with a baseline knowledge. I'm going to say that again, with a baseline knowledge of financial education to help their clients have a holistic, healthy, intersectional relationship with money. So if we think of financial experts like CPAs and CFPs being more of the how-to, financial therapists are more there to focus on the why. So less how to make a budget, how to save for retirement, how to save for an emergency, and much more why. Why is it important for you to save for those things? What's getting in the way of you saving for those things? Why is it challenging for you to use some of the tools that are available to you? So that's really what we are there to do.
I think that's super fascinating. And how did you get drawn into this world?
Oh, I fell into it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the story of many of us, but it's still newer.
Yeah.
How did you fall into it then? Yeah.
I try to shrink down and make more succinct my story, but essentially I'm a clinical social worker. I have a background in mental health. And in my first job with my master's degree, I got my first paycheck and was earning less than I did as a waitress. And really quickly, because I come from relative financial stability and financial privilege, I realized the impact on my physical and mental health of living paycheck to paycheck. All of a sudden, I was not sleeping through the night. My anxiety and depression that had been really well managed started to flare. And I was starting to get colds and flus all the time. And I just knew that money management and I just knew that money management was more than dollars in, dollars out. There was also this piece of intentionality. The messages that I got about being a social worker are like, you do this because you care, not because you care about money, and you're not here to make money. So that internal battle of wanting to do good in the world and also not wanting to live paycheck to paycheck was a struggle. So eventually I moved on to a better paying job. And the issue of money kept coming up in my clinical work. And my training basically told me to help people call an 800 number so their electricity didn't get shut off. But it was not about how they got there in the first place or how to prevent it from happening again. And I just really believe that the intersection of money and mental health was something that needed to be explored. And I also knew that I didn't want to go and become a CPA or a CFP. I knew I wanted to stay in the field of mental health, and I wanted to practice within that scope. So then I sought out additional training in financial therapy and in financial social work so that I could keep doing what I love doing, but with an emphasis on the mental and emotional side of money.
And I think that, that this profession exists. I think it also is a nod to something that banks and credit unions are increasingly becoming aware of. And that is like, they've invested in a lot of these budgeting tools, like here's a pie chart of your money. Here's a way to improve your money. But then, it doesn't work. It doesn't really improve financial outcomes. And it can be really actually depressing to engage with it. So this seems like, sort of a vibrant opportunity to think about it in a different way. And I'm curious, what would be a starting place you would advise like a bank or credit union or even a fintech startup that hasn't delved into this world yet of how to like think about this when they're, saying and wanting to improve someone's financial livelihood?
Oh, such a great question. And when I think about what somebody who has an interest in helping consumers manage their money better is thinking about meeting their consumers or their clients where they're at, which is something that we say all the time in therapy. So it sounds a little cliche, but let me paint a picture for you, Barry. Mm-hmm. When I say meeting your clients where you're at, for me as a financial therapist, that means that I have different tiers of meeting people where they're at. I partner with Cash App to help people understand how to take advantage of some of those tools and how to look at their spending insights and how to be mindful of where they're spending their money. For other people, I help them through generalized workshops on financial wellness with my partnership at the University of Michigan. And then for other people, it's personalized one-on-one financial therapy. So if I'm imagining myself as a bank or as a credit union, thinking through those different tiers and seeing whether or not there might be areas to lean into. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to reinvent the wheel, but helping to educate your consumers about what products and tools you already have available, and potentially even just thinking about advertising them more or showing them how they can be used. Because when we leverage these tools from a place of empowerment versus from a place of punishment, that's when we tend to get buy-in. And what I mean by that is you can have a savings tool or a budgeting tool, but if we are talking about it from a place of you need to spend less money, stop spending your money, you're bad, it's hard to engage with a tool like that. But if we're using that tool and we're saying, look at where you're spending your money. Does this feel good for you? Does this feel supportive of you? Is this spending in this particular area in alignment with your savings goals? And if not, what are the modifications that we can do? So it's less about an overhaul and much more about how can we help consumers understand the tools that are available to them and accessible to them, and potentially framing them around a more compassionate, more positive, more kind side of money instead of from that shame-based place that has typically dominated the personal finance narrative.
I love that you just mentioned the value. Like, did this expense line up with your value? And I'm curious, do you think something like that should be part of a digital banking experience of, kind of a mindful check-in? I mean, I don't think it would be for everybody, but do you think it should be among the offerings?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about any type of tool that we can use to help leverage people to do that type of check-in so they can be in a relationship with their money that is exactly that is more mindful. Because like you said, it's not about the only thing that you can do mindfully with your money is save. Of course, we can mindfully save. And if we're spending, making sure that we're taking that additional extra moment or 2 or 5 to make sure that the money that we are spending, we're less likely to have that regret come with it.
Regret. Yes, as that song is, I've had a few.
We all have
a few more.
Yeah. And that's another piece of financial therapy is naming that money mistakes are normal and that we've all made them. And to your point, Mary, we're going to make them again. This idea that we are infallible humans and we'll never slip up again, I think is a really hard standard for us to try and uphold.
And I'm curious about how you think about this. I've noticed like on TikTok, it goes 2 different ways. One way it's like, it makes people want to spend more. But on the other hand, I'm seeing things like debt confessionals of like, hey, I don't want to have shame about this debt, but I'm going to, story this and share it with people. I mean, do you think I mean, I'm sure it depends on the person, but do you think this is a healthy thing to be like more open about, what's really going on one's personal finance journey?
Yeah, I'm all about anything that we can do to normalize and validate our lived experience with money.
Hmm.
And you're so right that they tend to fall into these two categories. And I think that there's such a craving, there's such a desire, there's so many people that are wanting a more human approach to personal finances and a more compassionate and a more kind approach to finances. And so if I'm scrolling through TikTok and I have high consumer debt and I see somebody talking about their debt journey and how they got into debt and the steps that they took to get out of it, it makes me feel less alone, right?
Hmm.
And having that validation and not feeling alone takes it away from it being a personal problem where I'm a failure and into I'm a human, I'm a person who's made a mistake, or I was in a scenario where this was my only option, and what can I do to cope? Other trends that are kind of in that vein of normalizing and validating or spending a little bit less intentionally are things like under consumption core. So that's like spending less. For the past few years, thrifting has obviously taken off as a way to spend less on, new consumer goods. So there are always these different trends that are coming out. At the beginning of 2024, loud budgeting was a big trend where people would say out loud, I'm not spending my money on that. I'm saving up for this or I'm saving up for that. So anything that we can do, I'm all for it. And the nice thing too is that you can scroll on by for like, oh, that doesn't really feel great to me. Then no harm, no foul. You could just keep scrolling.
Yeah, no, I think it's so cool. Do you think like a fintech brand or a more traditional bank or credit union should be producing this kind of content on TikTok?
Great question. So, so I would say yes and. Yes, because
that's a good answer.
or maybe yes and an asterisk. Yes, if I think knowing going back to like the why, what is the why behind creating that content? I think something that is really important when it comes to social media is the great thing about it is anyone can produce content. And the not so great thing about it is that anyone can produce content. So if we have a reputable credit union or fintech app or, payment solution service that is offering insight that is actually truthful, that is incredibly important. And I think there are ways to do it that are engaging. And again, going back to like empowering to help consumers of that app learn how they could use your tool or use your service in a way that feels safe and that feels good, versus just kind of globbing on to all of the old ways that we used to talk about money.
Yeah, which often are like have been pretty hidden, I'd say.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go. I mean, you've mentioned you're the financial therapist at Square App, and that's not the only example of this happening. Ally Bank, for example, is giving people a few free months to the Calm app, and there are other fintech apps that approach like a mental health thing in a different way. Like one could block gambling purchases, for example, on certain apps. So like these are the different threads I'm like seeing as an outsider of how this is all kind of blurring and blending. But I'm curious, what kind of striking examples are you seeing or what are you hearing?
So in my partnership with Cash App, what I find to be really exciting is, as you mentioned, there is such a growing interest and a growing desire to better serve their consumers by providing them with the tools that are needed in order to make really wise financial decisions. So for example, with Cash App, you can look at your spending insights as I mentioned earlier, and really get a sense of, is this really where I want to be spending money? Is this where I don't want to be spending money? Soon there will be features rolling out that will allow you to do something called merchant blocking. And merchant blocking is exactly what it sounds like, where you could block a purchase from going through if you are paying with your Cash App card. Mm-hmm. So giving consumers the power to say, no, I don't want to spend money in that way, or yes, I do want to spend money in that way. If you are planning on spending money anyway on something like Uber, getting a discount by purchasing something through an app can be really helpful. But I love some of the things that you mentioned about these intersections and collaborations between different fintech platforms and mental wellness platforms. The thing that I like about the example with Calm is that, much like I shared earlier, it's about meeting consumers where they're at and meeting clients where they're at. for some clients and for some consumers, doing a 5-minute meditation is going to be all they need. Whereas for other people, they might need to go to a one-on-one therapist to get some additional support for their mental well-being. So I think all of these things can be beneficial because we're giving language and tools at the same time to consumers to give them the power to decide, how do I want to use this? How does this support me? And how does this best fit with my overall wellness snapshot?
Yeah. And so I think that's a really important point too. It's just like, there's no one solution here. There's like,
yeah,
there needs to be many.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? Especially when we think about tech, right? Tech loves to do problem solution and have it be if A, then B. But that's unfortunately not the way that most of our emotions work or the human brain works. We have so much data and so much insight about the way we behave, about the way we think, and about the way we feel. But there is something really powerful about giving consumers the opportunity to choose what fits for them and allowing them to decide what feels best. So it isn't a one size fits all. And I know that tech loves to be, this is the one solution, but there are many, many options here to help your consumers feel supported around their emotional and financial wellness.
Yeah. And I'm laughing right now because I think of like my friends. Sometimes I present like, oh, and here's this app that will do this, but they're like, oh, that wouldn't help me. You know what I mean? Like, but like the entrepreneur think that will solve the issue, but it's just often more nuanced.
Yeah, exactly.
Lindsay, there's one segment on the show that we do that's called That's What You Said. And luckily, among your many skills, you're an author. So That's What You Said was in your book as part of the financial anxiety solution. And, you know, it's a person with financial anxiety can feel guilty, embarrassed, or fearful of their money. Their heart races when the bill comes at dinner. Their stomach drops when they have to talk about their performance review. And they feel demoralized when they don't understand what's going on in their retirement account. I find that so striking because it's really showcasing the feelings, of course, of what's going on here. But I was hoping we could like unpack that a bit more. You know, walk me through an example or two of things you've encountered, you know, with real life humans.
Yeah. So my book, as you mentioned, The Financial Anxiety Solution, focuses on anxiety and money. And to be clear, this isn't necessarily talking about the clinical diagnosis of anxiety. This is the anxiety that we all experience as humans. And one of the things that when we experience anxiety is a natural response to a stressor. And so what happens is we get those physiological responses. Our breath gets a little bit shallower. We get a little bit sweaty. It's a little bit harder to focus. You might have some stomach queasiness. And when we feel that way, physically, our emotions kind of get on board. We start to question ourselves. We get really uncomfortable. We don't like being uncomfortable. So we kind of want to leave the scenario. And when we experience that financial anxiety, we try to make some sort of financial decision when we are in that state of being really overwhelmed from a nervous system standpoint, we aren't going to make the wisest decisions. So really thinking about first noticing that anxiety is happening. And then when we catch, oh, I'm feeling anxious because a bill got dropped off at dinner and I didn't discuss with my friends beforehand how we were going to split it. But, you know, you don't go through all that first, right? What you first feel is tension in your shoulders and your eyes start darting around the dinner table and you're wondering what's going to happen. So in that moment, pausing and noticing in that moment, oh my gosh, my heart rate is spiking. All of a sudden, my stomach is really clenched. My muscles are tight. This is anxiety. This is a response to stress. And then kind of talking yourself through. It's okay that I feel anxiety. It's okay that I feel stress. Why am I feeling this? Well, I'm feeling this because I was planning on just paying for the portion of the dinner that I bought. I don't want to split it every single way. And I'm really nervous or frightened that my friends might judge me if I make that ask. And then really thinking about how true is it? How true is it that this group of people who you've just broken bread with is going to say, Lindsay, you're so cheap. You're so stingy. I can't believe you did that. I mean, they might, but then maybe it's time to get a new group of friends. In reality, more likely is you can say, hey, this feels a little bit weird or I'm feeling a little bit anxious, but I was really just planning on spending money tonight on my portion of the meal. Can I just Cash App whomever takes the tab, my portion of the meal and my part of the tip? And when we do something like that versus respond to that nervous system dysregulation, we are able to make wiser financial decisions. And so the example there is, if I didn't pause, if I didn't take myself through the way I was thinking, the way I was feeling, I might just throw my credit card in and split it 4 ways and then feel that regret the next day that I didn't advocate for what I wanted financially. Or I throw my credit card in, but then the next time my friends ask me out, instead of saying, no, I can't afford it, or that's not in my budget right now, I just ghost. So those are the types of decisions that we might make when we're really anxious. And so encouraging us to just notice the connection between financial behaviors and anxiety, and giving ourselves permission to slow down, to check in on what's happening so that we can make decisions that we feel better about, or at least are decisions that were better in that moment for us.
Yeah, it's always that moment of like giving yourself permission to like create a pause. But it's very hard to do. There's one thing that's happened, and it's for an app that was created for older adults, but it's like when they're sending money to a new contact, it won't move for like 6 hours, but that's to give them that pause in case it's fraud. And I would love that idea used in other ways as well, to handle some of the emotional challenges tied up with money.
Yeah, such a great point.
And, you were just exploring this, and I know Cash App has that study about like manners, and it was really zoomed in on Gen Z, because I'm also curious about like, are there patterns in different ages here, but mostly
for sure.
Yeah. So I want to know about those patterns versus ages, but I'm curious what you found most striking in some of that data, or funny or surprising.
Yeah. So many different things that come up. But one thing, just as a therapist, as I zoom out and I look at these generational differences, what strikes me is how quickly our thoughts and our beliefs and our etiquette around money has changed with the rise of the way that we do things online versus the way we used to do things in brick and mortar in previous generations. And so if we imagine this study in particular was really looking at Gen Z and millennial folks, but what we noticed was how comfortable these generations of folks are, because they're digital natives, using money in a way that we might not use, and doing things that previous generations might consider to be a little bit gauche or a little bit tacky. So for example, Gen Z doesn't believe, generally speaking, in splitting the bill 50-50, or in that dinner example I gave, splitting it evenly 4 ways. They think that's kind of tacky. And they actually think that everybody should pay for what they got, because again, they grew up in this area where they were able to quickly divvy up who had what and send money back and forth. Whereas for previous generations, it would be mortifying to have to get out all of your dollars and make sure that it's exactly right and ask for anything different, right? So we saw that big difference. And the other thing is just the literal comfort that people have or don't have when it comes to digital or credit cards versus cash. So 25% of Gen Zers said that the actual physical cash gave them the ick. I don't know if I can say that as a millennial, but they were like, oh, it was associated with feeling cringy and icky and sad. They're just not used to it. So to me, I think it really highlights how quickly life has changed over the last, 20, 30 years, and how normal what other folks in older generations, how normal sending money to your friend has become, how normal it has been to advocate to just pay for your way, or to advocate to set a boundary and say, hey, I'm not going to go to that wedding. It's outside of my budget. Whereas a couple of generations ago, those were the things that were pretty taboo. Whereas these younger generations are far more comfortable naming what's going on, advocating for their needs, setting boundaries, and talking about some of those taboo things, because again, it's just like built in ways that it wasn't in previous generations.
Yeah. And it influenced, like there's an openness to like sharing how much money you make, for example, too, which I'm fine. I mean, can go both ways, right? Like, yes, that's important, but also, you might have some awkwardness as a result with a few people. But I mean, do you think this will have to influence product design in some way. And I don't know exactly how I'm thinking about that, but I am, yes, you're nodding your head.
Yeah. I mean, if we know that people are getting a physical negative reaction to cash, then yeah, we want to be mindful of the symbols and the designs that we are using when it comes to money. The other thing is that younger folks are so much more comfortable communicating in pictures. And I mean, literally like with a meme, but I also mean with emojis, right? So what are the emojis that we associate with like good and positive and fun and togetherness? And what are the emojis that we associate with stress and awkwardness and tension, and being mindful about how we communicate through basically a new alphabet, right? It's pretty cool to think about that, and to also think about how we can incorporate those things. Obviously, we want them to be UX designed and make sure that they're user friendly, but being mindful of the way that people communicate with each other and using similar language, even if it is a GIF or an emoji or something like that.
No, I love that. And I mean, are you seeing like patterns in the emojis people use for expressing money things?
Ooh,
besides
yeah.
the dollar.
I mean, yeah, for sure. Exactly. I mean, exactly like what you just said. Like if you type in money on your text messages, you're going to see all of these different symbols come up. And it will be interesting to see which ones are like the ones that we start to associate with good and the ones we start to associate with bad. I'm sure over time we'll be able to tease that data apart and say, oh, the mouth face emoji means this, and the the money with the wings emoji means that.
You're bringing me back. Oh, years ago, I wrote a story of like how emojis were like sort of breaking down bank systems because it's like a newer code and it was like screwing them up. But also it got into the like, oh, how to interpret these things, and like, oh, maybe if a bank experimenting will misunderstand the use of this emoji. And it's just so funny to think you think something so innocuous, but then it could be like, wow, that was a big thing, actually.
For sure.
Well, cool. Well, Lindsay, I know we're almost at time, but I have one last question. But before I ask you that, I just, how should people find you, or, any last thoughts on, financial well-being that you would advocate for executives?
Yeah. So final last thoughts on financial well-being for executives is to just, do an assessment of how you are currently addressing financial well-being. If you are addressing financial well-being mostly by different tools and different products, how can you enhance them with different messaging or different language to incorporate the emotional side of money? What are the things that you can do without, having to recreate the wheel to help your consumers and your product users have a healthier relationship with money? Anecdotally, I just know when I'm working with my clients that when they feel like they are being treated with compassion and with empathy and with kindness, whether it's with an interaction with an app or with a bank or with a credit union customer service member, they're much more likely to continue engaging with that, right? So it sounds kind of basic, but taking what you have and thinking about it through the lens of overall holistic financial wellness. And then in terms of how people can find me, my business is called Mind Money Balance, and you can find me basically all over the internet.
I found her that way.
Website, I was going to say my website, my podcast, my YouTube, but it all exists there. And as Mary, as you mentioned earlier, my book is The Financial Anxiety Solution. I highly encourage you to grab a copy, ideally purchasing a copy from your local bookstore to keep your dollars in your community.
And may I just add, I love that part of your book included like, and maybe have one of these drinks while reading this. I mean, it wasn't all alcohol. You had different options. So I don't mean it as a boozy read, but like you got to create that space to get your brain to be like, okay, I need to be thoughtful. Yeah,
exactly. We want to create, if not positive associations with money, at least neutral, because for so many of us, we're scared, we're anxious, we're worried, we're afraid about our money. So how can we start creating a new connection and setting the tone, whether it is with, a fizzy lemonade or a grounding ginger tea? What can we do to start creating more sensory integration around having a healthy relationship with money?
I love that. I love that. And my last question for you, what's the image on your phone's lock screen?
Oh, it's my dog.
As is mine. What kind of dog do you have?
I have a Portuguese water dog. She's sleeping. You probably can't see her on camera, but she is 45 pounds of snuffleupagus, and I adore her.
Oh, well, she's lucky to have made that status on your phone. And
Great
Lindsay,
question.
Lindsay, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate, your thoughts on this area that I know is going to be becoming like ever more present in the industry.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mary. This was so much fun.
Okay, so one thing that really stood out is that what is considered poor manners today might be good manners for the next gen. In 2 weeks' time, I speak with the co-founder and CEO of Fritch, Katrin. We talk about why her startup is trying to make money less taboo for Gen Z. Also, for any of the audience who caught the Cornerstone Fritch Z Hits Different webinar, we give you a bonus. Our webinar after party, where we answer your questions we didn't get to. See you then.